during my youth consisted of really, I lived in an Irish neighborhood. I lived on Miller Street, not on Pacific Street. But we did everything else around Pacific, Grey Rock, and Brook Street.
What did you do on Pacific Street?
On Pacific Street, we bought, all of our clothes were bought there when we were children. We bought, there was a store called Schulman's. You probably have heard about it.
Yes.
They had clothing, they had shoes, they had everything. There was also Rosen's, where we bought our clothes, some of our clothes and a lot of our linens and stuff like that.
As you're describing what you did there, roughly what year are you talking about?
I'm talking about...
Or what period of time?
Well, I was born in 1905, but this was I'd say this was around 1908, 1907, maybe even before that. Because for a while we lived on Chapel Street when I was maybe 3 or 4.
That's when Polly Levine lived.
That's right, they lived next door.
Yeah, Cecil and Polly Levine.
So that all of the life of our youth took place around just 2 or 3 blocks. Can I say, I had to come about 4 blocks, because if you remember the layout, well, you remember where Miller Street was?
Yeah.
Just off of Elm Street, where the Elm Street School was.
Right.
We used to go to the synagogue. It was on
The
Grey Rock
synagogue
Place.
was on Grey Rock Place.
Grey Rock Place, the old synagogue.
Did you ever do any shopping for food on Pacific Street yourself?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I know Max Myers was where we got corned beef sandwiches.
It was a Spelky
And
building.
he also had ice cream, and he had, we haven't seen them around lately, whipped cream.
Butter?
No, whipped cream
Whipped
kind of
cream?
a thing. The name escapes me, but that was something that I used to like.
What did the store look like then, Max Myers?
Max Myers, the original store was right on in the corner building, in the brick building.
Spelky building.
And the Spelky building. And in the back, he had a pool table. And in the front, he had delicatessen.
Yeah, and he also had an outside stand with fruit and everything on the sidewalk.
Then he moved a couple of doors up, where it was just groceries and the pool table was out and everything else. But Max Myers was a tradition. But the grocery store that did the biggest business, I think, of groceries, was Walensky's.
Yeah.
Now, they were related to me. My mother was a Spelky. Spelky was an old family. Louis Spelky was the first member of the clan who came here, and he opened L. Spelky and Sons. You know where that is.
Yes, yeah.
And then my grandfather...
was older than Louis, was he?
No, Abe Spelky was a son.
Oh,
Abe and
was he?
Morris,
Oh,
Max,
was he?
and Mary were the children. And the Walenskys were related to us. Mrs. Walensky was Louis Spelky's sister. And the store, the old man, Misha Hirsch was his Jewish name, was a little fellow. He was about yay big with a beard. His son, Saul, we called him Zawel Walensky, used to more or less manage, and his sister Sarah. They were on Brook Street originally in that Spelky building.
Yeah.
Then they moved onto Pacific Street, and they opened up a bigger store, a really modern store. And I worked for them. One summer while I was in high school. By that time, my grandfather always had horses, so I knew horses. And I used to deliver orders with a horse and wagon. And on Saturday, we used to go to the dock where the Shady Side was a paddle wheel boat.
Yeah, way down Canal Street.
Down on Canal Street,
Yeah.
that came in from New York with the herring and the butter and a lot of the stuff. It was
The boat had food on it?
The boat would bring it in from New York.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, for freight. The freight would come in that way.
Yeah.
And I would bring it back to the store, and then that's what they used. But
So you were the pickup agent? You went down to the boat?
I also delivered orders by horse and buggy.
Oh, you delivered orders to people's homes then?
Yeah, up to Atlantic Street, like the Osmonds used to live, and the Questons lived on Main Street,
Yeah.
I remember on the 3rd floor. So they'd call up for an order, and it would be a big order, and I would bring it over there.
That's right. We've got a picture of Mr. Walensky's horse
Store?
and buggy.
Oh, have you? Well,
Yes.
That's the horse and
So
buggy.
you used to drive
I used
that?
to drive that horse
You
and
haven't got a
buggy.
picture of my father's horse and wagon.
No, if you have one, we'd love to borrow it.
Store. No, we used to go, up in the country. It was all muddy roads. Take us a whole day to deliver a little load of furniture from Pacific Street.
Uh-huh.
Now, the Walensky was, you probably got to, now I don't know whether, on the corner of the Spelke building, on the corner of Pacific and Brook Street, was a drugstore.
Troopin.
And it was owned by Troopin. Remember the name of Troopin?
Abe Hecht used to work there.
Yes, Abe
Yes,
worked there.
subsequently Abe worked there when he
Yeah,
came
Abe
to this
worked
country. I remember when he came here.
Yeah. Let's see, who took
My
over
first
after
experience,
Troopin?
Levine went in
Levine,
there afterwards.
yeah.
But my first experience, and I always remember this story. Remember Paulie Kutzo?
Yes,
Well,
sure.
I went to school with him and played football with Paulie
Yeah,
Kutzo.
Paulie was very
But
good.
when he first came to this country, as I say, we lived in an Irish neighborhood. So he came from Hungary, and they called him a Hanyak.
Mm-hmm.
Now the kids used to call him a Hanyak. So when my brother saw,
Mm-hmm.
when he was born, my mother didn't feel well for a little while after that, and I guess the doctor prescribed some cognac. So they sent me over to Troopin's drugstore to buy a bottle of cognac. And they said, do you remember? Remember, a bottle of cognac. So in trying to remember it, I kept saying, I'll remember it if I think of Kutz, cognac. So I kept saying, cognac, cognac, cognac. And I walk into the drugstore, and I asked Mr. Troopin for a bottle of cognac. He says, what do you want? I said, I want a bottle of cognac. He said, what is it? I said, I don't know. My mother told me to get it.
Memory
So
by
you go back-
association.
Yeah, you go back and tell your mother to tell you what. Now she told me it was cognac, and I kept saying, all the way, ran all the way. In order not to forget. Never forgot that.
Well, having worked on Pacific Street for many years, you must remember a lot of the culture and what life was like there.
Well, see, everything took place, all Jewish life took place on Pacific Street. Nobody went, my father once bought a suit on Atlantic Street from Brady and Shadane, no.
Henry and Lovett.
Henry and Lovett.
Henry and Lovett.
That was
on the
really,
last street.
you know, my father had got to be, was a builder now, and so Abe Spelke said to him, why don't you go to Henry and, I think Abe Spelke used to do work for Abe.
Mhm.
And as a present or something, or a bet or whatever it was, he said, you go in and buy a suit of clothes there, I'll pay for it. That's how he happened to, otherwise everything was bought in the area there.
There was enough there so that whatever you needed was
Rimland
there.
opened up a shoe store up in the corner.
He was near
Kramer.
Main Street.
The Kramers had a shoe store. He was also,
Yeah,
used
well,
to
let's
fix
see.
shoes.
Rimland, Weiss's,
Well, Weinstein opened a grocery store, but that was quite a number of years
who was
later.
next to Weiss's? Freed's. Freed's had
Yeah.
a store.
They had a saloon, didn't they?
Betty Cohn.
I hear there were a lot of saloons on
were.
Pacific Street.
Oh,
There
yeah.
were. Now, I just noticed Bennett Levine, it was in my class, he died.
Mm-hmm.
His father, the Levine brothers.
Yeah.
Remember Tuffy Levine?
Yes.
Tuffy,
Tuffy
yeah.
was a cousin of
Yeah.
his.
He married
And
the Moore girl.
That's right.
Yeah.
The two brothers had a saloon. That was the Jewish saloon.
You don't
Then-
typically think of Jewish people having saloons,
Then
but
Sandhouse, Mr. Sandhouse had
Yes, yeah.
and he bootlegged for years afterwards during Prohibition.
Let's see, Cuz Minor was
Cuz
there, with
Minor?
the grocery.
Because Minor with a
I
grocery
also
store.
heard there was a house of ill repute somewhere on Pacific Street.
Well, they're probably what we wouldn't know about.
We were-
Of course you wouldn't.
We were kids.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. That I think shows the life. There were also Italians on Pacific Street,
Yeah.
and more living actually in the street,
Yeah.
because most of the Jews, and when they got a little more affluent, moved around to Grey Rock. We lived on Miller Street. Then there was Hawthorne Street,
Hawthorne
was
Street,
Jewish
Chapel
mostly.
Street.
Chapel Street.
Yeah.
But
Brook
they used to
Street.
have rock fights with the Italians.
The Jews and the
I got a
Italians.
good story for
Polly Levine, who was, his name was Saul Charles Levine, but they called him Polly. Why, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like they called his brother Sidney Zezel. Why?
Zezel.
Because his mother used to call him Zelek. So the Irish kids and the Italians
Zezel.
couldn't say Zezel. They called him Zezel. So we had a rock fight one day. And Paulie had a little wooden sword that he made, a piece of wood and a crossbar, and he was the leader of the we Jews. And he got hit in the head with a rock, with a small rock. But he looked around for a nice soft place to fall down. He lay down and he said, "Fight on, my brave men. I am wounded."
No, talking about the
Never
rock.
forgot. Isn't that funny?
Right, talking about the rock fights. See, the Irish lived near Main Street, then the Italians, then the Jews. And the Jews and Italians used to always have rock fights. But when the Irish attacked, the Jewish and the Italians fought the Irish together. Oh, where Rocklands was, on the corner of Canal, there, and then it ran into the Pacific, was Cabanas, Italian grocery.
Well, the Carps had a, the Carp family had a store there
Bakery.
too.
Yes.
No, there was a Carp, Henry Carp's father and mother.
Oh, Henry Carp.
Henry Carp's father and mother, and the Hots, you know, the other Hots.
Yes, right.
Her father, she was a Carp. They had a store.
Hots was a Carp, yeah.
Then the Charlottes came quite a bit afterwards.
Oh, yeah, sure. They moved to Pound.
They came afterwards.
Pound Ridge.
Can you
No,
fellas remember?
The father stayed here till he died.
Yeah, but
That
I
was
mean the
the
family,
son.
the store.
The son was just one of the boys.
Yeah.
He's still there.
They're up in
Bedford.
Bedford, yeah.
Can you remember when Canal Street was a canal?
No. I
No,
don't
but
remember
I can tell you this, our house faced Main Street, the backside was on Canal. And when we had a flood, water, you know, because the canal used to be there, we used to get floods of water. We used to have to pump it out.
Did boats ever come in that far?
Well,
Not to
that's
my- I know it
before,
did.
that's
Yeah.
before our time.
That's before
just
your
by
time.
That was
knowledge.
all a canal.
Just by
The
knowledge.
Stanford Foundry was on Canal Street, the
That's
old
right.
foundry.
That's right. They
One
used
of
to
the
make
oldest,
used to make the Stanford Range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was quite a, was right at the, almost at the junction of Pacific.
Yeah, just before the junction.
A lot of
I'll
people.
tell you interesting stories about this guy,
Yeah.
because his family had the first movie house in Stanford.
Tell us about the movie house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember it?
Yes. I used to take all the kids.
Where was the movie house?
You know, you were funny, we'd go if it was
It
quiet.
was on the corner,
I
it
had
was
a
on the
key-
corner of Pacific
Next to
Street.
Rockland. No, Rockland was on the corner. We were the next building. Rockland was Canal, right at the
Yeah.
junction. We were the next building, going up towards.
What was the name of the theater? Was that the Lyceum? Lyceum?
No,
No,
the
no,
Lyceum was on
The Lyceum was on Atlantic Street.
Atlantic Street. Then there was another one, the Star, which was on Main Street, just opposite Pacific Street.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But what was it? Do you remember the name of this theater?
Amateur night. We used to go up there and act in the Star.
Oh, so this was. Did you have live theater or you had movies?
They had
Well, they had
both.
movies, but we'd have an act, amateur night once a week.
But Butch, I don't know whether you remember this, but Butchie had a bicycle. He was one of the first kids that had a
Yeah,
bicycle.
Little red
And
bicycle.
you know what the son, he used to charge it to ride it.
Sure. That's
That's
how
right.
I
How
made
much
all
did he
the
charge
money.
you?
A penny or two, I don't remember.
Yeah.
But
They
he was a
didn't have
robber.
more than a penny.
He was an entrepreneur.
Imagine him, that's how he got rich. You think he got rich from practicing law? No.
But you know where the junction is, where Canal meets Pacific Street.
Epstein went in there eventually with the chicken
Yeah,
market.
well, we used to have, for Halloween night, we used to collect wood and boxes and everything for a week. And Halloween night, we'd have a big bonfire, every Halloween night. A big bonfire, right in the middle of the street.
And all the kids came out for this?
Oh, yes, everybody.
I guess you didn't get dressed up in costumes in those
Oh,
days.
no.
That's a newer habit.
We
Talking
couldn't afford
about that.
costumes.
About, you know, the shoe was right around the corner.
On Grey Rock?
Yeah, Grey Rock, yeah.
The old synagogue. And the kids used to hang around out there, you know, and play, during Passover we'd play nuts, you know, and so at one time, I wasn't involved in the construction of it, but they built a tent made out of feed bags over what we call Holly's Lot. Remember where Holly's Lot was?
Yes, Holly's back.
It was a big lot. Well, Brook Street ran right into the Holly's Lot
Yeah.
there. And then you circled around into
St. John's Place and
Well,
Hawthorne Street.
the street that they named, it used to be, it was named after, what's his name, Mike,
Treasure?
Tresser.
Tresser Avenue.
Yes.
But
Treasure
they named it
Avenue, yeah.
Tresser Avenue after this, he died in the war, one of the,
Well, they made Tresser Boulevard.
that's
yeah.
right, before,
Willow?
afterwards.
Huh?
Willow?
No. This was, I think it was School Street, but they called it Tresser
School Street,
Avenue.
that's right,
It was
School Street, yeah.
Yeah.
They called it Tresser Avenue afterwards, named after him when he died in World War I. But, what was my thought now? About,
You're heading somewhere.
you know, I had a story, you know, it just slipped my mind for a moment.
Going back to Pacific Street for the moment, maybe
Yeah,
maybe it'll
going
come.
up Brook Street.
You were talking about Halloween.
Oh, we're talking about this, they made a tent out of feed bags.
Right.
You know, there was a lot of people that had, used to buy oats and things, and it came in burlap bags. So they made a big tent, and they even had a cloakroom where you could hang your clothes. And there was a Polish kid by the name of Steve McCluskey. Now, Steve McCluskey used to do a trick. The fire eater, they called him, see? So you paid I don't remember what it was, a penny or 2 cents to get in.
He charged also.
And then it wasn't Butch, it was the older boys, like Polly Levine and some of the older boys. And he did a fire eating act. He would take kerosene, put it in his mouth, and then blow it out on a match, and the fire would come out, you know. So he got very big applause, and for an encore, he would do it again, except he did it this way. And up went
And the bags caught on fire?
The whole tent burned
And
out.
the kids lost their jackets. They hugged them, you know, they say, take your jacket off and hang it in the cloakroom. Most of the kids lost their jackets. I didn't have a jacket that day.
Well, it sounds like as kids you spent a lot of time right on the street.
The whole life, yes, went around.
Oh, yeah, everything was done on the street.
Around there.
Everything.
What was dating like in those days? I'm sure you guys did a lot of dating.
When we got older,
A lot of
when we got older,
you know.
I had moved to, when I was 12, we moved to the corner of Henry and South Street. And then we used still, but by that time, we were already buying in other stores. Abe Spelke used to work for a clothier in Portchester. He married a Portchester girl. And I would think he worked for one of the Queskins had a brother who had a clothing store there. And then his father opened the store for him. Remember where the G.G. Stew store,
G&G?
G&G was?
On
In
Atlantic?
that store on Atlantic Street.
Yeah.
He opened the store there, so we used to buy, when we got a little older, my father used to buy clothes there. And we finally, the Jews finally came out of Pacific Street and were buying around in the community.
That's interesting. You say that when you were younger, you remember you bought everything on Pacific
Everything
Street.
was
Well,
on
they had
Pacific
every
Street.
kind of a store, everything.
Everybody, you bought everything there.
And then
All
gradually...
your clothes, all your food, everything.
Atlantic Fish Market was on
The Atlantic Fish
original.
Market, they were Italians.
Yeah.
But my mother bought fish from the Atlantic Fish Market as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Because there's except occasionally during the holidays, if the Atlantic Fish Market couldn't get the special fish to make the gefilte fish that my mother used to like to make, my father would go to New York and get it.
Why do you think stores left Pacific Street and branched out?
Well, actually, I don't think many of the stores branched out.
Or why did they move?
I don't think the stores moved so much. Now, the Spelke shoe store, not to my memory, originally was on Pacific Street. And if I'm not mistaken, I think when they moved around the corner to Main Street, I think Sherman opened a little store there. It was a little wooden building. I think they lived upstairs. It was like an attic.
I guess that was the way at first.
You don't mean that sold drug supplies?
Who?
Sherman, I suppose. sold-
No, that was long afterwards. They were up on Canal, that was long afterwards. No, this is around 1913, 1912, somewhere around when I was 6 or 7 years old. I remember that. very well.
Where did you fellows go to school?
Well, I went to the Elm Street School, and then I went to the Woodland Avenue School when we moved to, and then I went to Burdick Junior High.
What was school like when you went to Center School?
I never went to Center.
I went to Center.
I was supposed to go to Center.
Yeah.
Because
Burdick was the
the
principal
ninth
of Center.
grade, well, Burdick was the principal
Of Center, and
Of-
then Elm,
of Elm
and
Street
then
first.
Burdick High.
of Elm
No,
Street
Center
first.
first.
No?
Yes, I know, I was at Center.
Well, he came
Because
up.
when I used to do something wrong, he'd make me walk from Center with him over to Elm as a
Well,
penalty.
maybe he principaled both schools. I wouldn't know that.
Yes, he was both schools,
Now,
that's
that
What was
right.
his name? What was the principal's name?
Oscar Leroy Burdick.
Burdick.
Oh, Burdick was the
Burdick.
principal, and
Yeah,
Burdick School was
they,
named for
they
him.
named Burdick
That's
High
right.
School after him.
You
That was
see,
the only
the
high school in
elementary school, the
South.
ninth grade, you had to go to Center.
Mhm.
They didn't have a
Yeah.
ninth grade at Elm. But by that time, we moved to corner of Henry and South, so I went to the Woodland Avenue School, and I graduated from Woodland Avenue School. I went to high school, and in high school, we had an ROTC, you
Yeah,
remember,
I was in the
well,
Army.
so was I.
I was the second
Yeah,
lieutenant.
we had an ROTC, issued uniforms, we had to have them cut down to our size,
Yeah,
and wear the uniform every day, and we had classes, and,
yeah, I went to Camp Devens for 2 weeks.
yeah,
Camp Devens is Massachusetts.
I didn't.
Yeah, I went.
Well, he's older than I am, you know.
Do either of you remember anything about your bar mitzvahs?
I remember mine very well,
Where did you have it?
in the old synagogue. As a matter of fact, there was a friend of mine by the name of Loeb Bernstein,
Loeb, yeah.
and Loeb was bar mitzvah the same day, but Loeb never went to Hebrew school, really. I mean, and his family were more, well, they weren't, they considered themselves like Deutsche Yehudim, you know, they were a little, and Loeb was bar mitzvah the same day, and he heard that I was gonna, you know, so he made it that day, really, I think. It wasn't that we weren't actually born on the same day.
Mhm.
But I did them after, and I made the speech, you know, today I'm a fountain pen, and my parents and all that Loeb had to do was say the bracha over the Torah and get an aliyah, and that was
You had an
easy.
easy job.
He had an easy
See,
job.
we had a Hebrew school.
The Hebrew school was
Same
held
street as the
in the
church.
basement of the synagogue.
Mhm. And after your Haftorah, after the bar mitzvah was over,
After-
were there many people there? Did you have a party?
We had a party at my home.
Yeah.
What my father did was, my father built couple of six-family houses on Henry Street. And we lived in a six-room apartment, and he took the furniture out of the dining room and the living room and another room, and stored it into the room, and he put benches up, and we had a big party. We had about, I don't know, maybe 100 people.
We were speaking with Aaron Weissman earlier,
Yeah.
who remembered his bar mitzvah, and what he remembered was after the bar mitzvah was over, they had some schnapps, and they had some herring, and that was it. Nothing like the big parties we have today.
Well, no,
But you had a big
we
party.
had a big party, yes.
Aaron lived
Well, we
on,
had at least 100 people.
Where'd Aaron live?
But we had a big family, you see.
Right. Aaron
Between-
lived on Richmond Hill Avenue, wasn't he?
Yeah, his father had a saloon there.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
absolutely, yeah.
That's
But
why
they-
he had the schnapps.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they came from, did they go to New Canaan afterwards? I don't remember. But they lived in New Canaan.
They lived in New Canaan for a
Mhm.
while.
Yeah.
You say you had a big family. How many brothers and sisters
Well,
did you
no,
have?
I don't mean my immediate family. I had one brother and one sister.
But your surrounding family.
But the Spelkes and my father's family, the Weissbergs, and as I say, the Walensky's, and who else? I think Sugar Brown was related to us too. He was.
Sugar Brown, who's Sugar Brown?
Huh? You remember Sugar Brown? Teddy Lipsis?
Oh, Teddy. Oh, Teddy moved
Sure, he's a
to
character
Florida, yeah.
today.
Teddy Lipschitz,
He's
yeah.
a character. He was with the subsequently went with like the
He went into,
mafia.
he went into the
gambling-
betting
gambling
game.
outfit.
The betting
Yeah,
game.
yeah.
He used to take bets.
Was there gambling on Pacific
No,
Street?
no, he didn't get that way here.
Uh-huh.
But he's big time. I mean,
We had no money,
I've
we
seen him.
couldn't gamble.
When I took a cruise on the Homeric, my wife and I, and my father and my stepmother, Bess, were in Miami. And so I arranged for them to fly over to Havana,
Mhm.
got them a room in the hotel, and our ship was only there for a day. But when we got there, I went over to, he was already there. I rented a car and I took him around, took him to the ship for lunch.
Mhm.
Then at night we took him out, and at the hotel that he was staying at, I brought him back and then was picking him up at night. And just as we were walking out the door to get into the car, I heard my father say, "Todres, achaleria," you know? I look around and it's Teddy Lipschitz, Sugar Brown.
Teddy, yeah.
You got to
So-
start in Stanford.
So And my father, I went over and said, what the hell are you doing? He said, George Raft and I have the gambling concession here at the hotel.
Yeah.
He said, you gotta come in, you gotta come in. He said, you got me in a bad time. I just flew in from Miami. I was there with, he mentioned the name of all the actors, and it was true. And he said, you gotta come back. I said, well, I gotta come back. Pop and Bess was staying here. Well, we took Pop and Bess around to all the gambling joints, you know. And when we got back, we walked in, and now Sugar's dressed up. Tuxedo, you know, and the place is mobbed. Gambling, all kinds of gambling. And he came over to us and says, come on, follow me. He walked over to a table, there were 4 women sitting there. He said, scram. They disappeared. And we had the table. And then he brought George Raft over and introduced us to him. And remember Herbie Yellen?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Herb Yellen told me once we were on our way to New York, I don't want to digress too much, to try to get Benny Leonard to the Jewish Center for one of the sports dinners that we were having. And he told me that he used to dance with George Raft. And he didn't look like a dancer to me, frankly, and I took it with a grain of salt. So I said to George Raft, I said, does the name Herb Yellen mean anything to you? See, he was my first dancing partner.
Who was the girl? We'll never know.
No, they were hoofers,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
professional.
Yeah. We've heard some interesting stories about when people were younger and they used to shop for food, that the chickens were live. And are there any stories that you remember about
I remember
unusual experiences in your food shopping?
Let me say this. Do you remember Mr. Walensky?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the young people today knew him because he owned the Jewish Center for a while, you know?
He was the custodian.
He was the custodian.
Yeah.
Well, he was in the chicken business on Brook Street. And of course, my grandfather we always had chickens. My grandfather was in the coal and ice business. And we always had
Coke and ice.
Coal.
Coal and
Yeah,
ice.
he used to sell coal.
Yeah.
I had 2 uncles and another fellow, my grandfather, would go out in the winter and sell coal by the bucket. And in the summer, they had an ice house. They cut ice in the winter, stored it in this ice house, and then sold it for 10 cents, 20 cents a piece.
Where did they get the ice? Where did they cut it?
Oaths Pond, wherever there were ponds, you know, they would get it for nothing. They would go there and cut the
Diamond
ice.
Ice Company was on Main Street.
Well, they used to make their ice.
Yeah.
They used to make their ice
They cut it right up,
artificially.
yeah.
But this is the days before they could make it.
Before they could make it, or they couldn't, you know, labor was cheap. Labor was cheap. But Walensky was in that business, selling chickens, and even if you had chickens, you had to take them somewhere, because that's where the chauffeur would be.
Yeah, you got to
And
go
they
to
had,
insurance.
Chazan Shapiro was a chauffeur, and there was a Mr. Levine. Remember him? Levine? What was his name? He had a flat nose. He broke his nose. His son did. They lived on the corner. They lived near Holly's lot, right on the corner there.
The son broke the father's nose?
No, the son had a
You
broken
don't mean
nose.
Polly Levine's family.
No.
They lived on
It
Chapel
isn't
Street.
They lived on Chapel Street.
Yeah.
But you used to go down there to get the chickens.
No, I used to bring them over there, and he had the chauffeur would come there and kill them.
How would you carry the chickens? Did you have them in a basket, or?
No, you just tie the legs,
Tie
you
the
don't put them
legs,
in a
that's
bag.
all.
They're a
Right.
feed bag. know?
You took them down live?
Always had feedback, yeah.
Yeah.
Killed them.
Yeah.
And to me, this was the normal way of doing it. But we, at one time when we lived on Miller Street, and our yard, the yard was quite big with barns and horses, and our backyard used to back up to the Capabiancas. Do you know the Capabiancas?
Yeah, she lived on
One of the-
Strawberry Hill, the music teacher.
Strawberry
That's
Hill,
right.
yeah.
Her
Linda,
family.
Linda Capabianca.
Yeah, they had
Linda
a store on Main Street there.
Her
Travel
travel agency. He used
They
to.
were one of the earliest ones.
Yes, they brought, when Frank Mercedes came over here, he stayed with them the first time. They would get people places to live and so forth. But Alfredo, there was Linda, Zanetta was the oldest, and there was Linda, then Alfredo, and then there were two younger ones. But Alfredo was my friend, he was my contemporary too. And we used to have a lot of fun. And one day his mother called him, and she says, wants to kill a chicken. So he caught a chicken, and got an axe, took him over to a block we used to chop wood, chopped the head off of the chicken who was hopping around the place without a head. Well, this is a hell of a way, you know, we cut them, and then they had to squeeze the
Got to get all the blood out, yeah.
Squeeze the
And
gullet.
they had to die quickly.
Yeah, and I had to put them in a bag, let the blood, you know, but that was, how can you do a thing like that? But that's the way they did it all the time. Chop the head off and the chicken would run all over the place, with no head.
I was thinking of that famous Italian. He fought the Tin Can Romanello. He lived opposite.
Oh, yeah.
He fought the lightweight championship, but he lost. He lived opposite.
Did you fellas go to Hebrew school
yes.
on Grey Rock Place?
Sure.
Yes, yes.
Did you remember anything about that?
Well, the Hebrew school was down in the synagogue.
But then they changed it to the store, you know, the Rose stores. And just going
But
towards.
only temporarily while they were, then do you remember the old Hebrew Institute that was on Grey Rock
I don't.
Place?
I know it was there, but I don't remember.
Well, just
it.
beyond, it was a big home, the Rockland, was it the Rockland? Oh, no.
Wasn't right.
It was, I can't remember the name, but it was a wealthy family's home. And they had stables across the street, and it was a stone building. And it was a big home, you know. And the center, was bought and named the Stanford Hebrew Institute, which is the same corporation that owns this building now.
Yeah.
But when we bought up on Prospect Street, they changed the name from the Hebrew Institute to the Stanford Jewish Center. Now it's been changed to the Center for the Jewish Community and so forth.
Mhm.
But you mentioned something before that might be interesting to. At that time, everybody was Orthodox. All Jews attended the Orthodox.
We only had one show.
There was only one show.
Yeah.
Now, when the Temple Bethel was organized, they met in the old Hebrew Institute. And they met there for some time until they decided, it was decided to build a Jewish center. And then Temple Bethel was going to bought a lot next door, was going to build Temple Bethel. And there was quite a bit of friction there at that time, because they thought they'd build together, and then they didn't, and they built separate institutions. And for some time, there was a friction between the Orthodox and the really Orthodox considered them goyim. You know what I mean? The next thing that happened was when the Reform came to town.
Rabbi Silver.
Rabbi? No, it was Rabbi Silver.
Marx was here before Silver, wasn't he?
Silver was.
Marx was.
Silver was Sinai.
Yeah.
Sinai, that's
But
Reform.
Sinai was started.
Yeah.
Yeah. They bought the building from my family.
When Sinai was started, the whole thing changed. You know, all of a sudden, people began to realize, because the younger people were growing up, you know, and we realized that if people think that way, that if there are enough of them that want to have a Reformed temple, and the Reformed temples were recognized all over all over the world, except that they were not, there weren't too many of them, because most of the immigrants,
They were Orthodox when they first came, sure.
And most of the people who started Bethel were Abe Spelke was very instrumental, and most of the second generation, although Abe came over here, he was a big boy, and Morris, but after they realized that, then there was no big problem between.
No animosity between them.
animosity.
You're both members of Bethel, aren't you?
No.
No, I'm a good as
I used to be a member of Bethel also. I always was a member
I was
of
a member
Good
too.
But
My-
now you're members
Well,
of
my
of
brothers-
Shalom.
My father was president of Good Shalom many years ago. My grandfather was active. So I never left it. But when my daughter was growing up, my son was bar mitzvah in Good Shalom. And the Hebrew school was in the Jewish Center at that time. But if you went to the Hebrew school, you had to start, I think it was 8, and you had to go 4 days a week. And with dancing lessons and music lessons and one thing and another. And then all of my daughter's friends, that she associated with, went to school with, were members of Bethel.
When you went...
So we joined there only for the
Right.
purpose of having her go,
Sure.
and she was confirmed in with them.
When you were small and you went to the synagogue, what was the holiday like? Was it different than the activities in the synagogue now? What can you picture as you go back in your mind?
And as I picture it, going back in my mind, the young people really couldn't wait, were forced to stand there alongside of their parents. In the first place, mother was upstairs, you know, she couldn't even see anywhere, see? And you had to be down, you were forced there. So most of the kids would be hanging outside.
The women sat upstairs.
Oh,
Yes, yes.
Now, you're back on Grey Rock Place?
Yes.
Yeah, you couldn't sit together in those days.
Were there two separate rooms?
No,
No, there was a gallery.
Balcony.
A balcony. And, of course, at Agudas Shalom today, the women don't sit with the men. But
they sit
now
in the
the
back.
balcony is about yay high.
Right, right. I'm trying to picture what it was like then.
Well, do you know what the track is here?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you consider it just one part of the room, that was
Right.
it. And it was so high that you could hardly see the women. As a matter of fact, I was in an Orthodox synagogue in Amsterdam. And there, it's even worse there. They have, you can't even see in back of it.
Well, the really Orthodox, the men and women can't even see one
Yeah,
another.
they
That's
don't
what you
even, you
mean.
couldn't even see,
Yeah,
look out.
yeah.
As a matter of fact, there was a massacre there, and they, you know, and when we were there, I attended a Kolnida service at the center. I met Red Wexler. We arranged to meet there for the Kolnida service. And after it was over, we walked out and we started talking to this fellow who was with some big corporation, was just living there temporarily for a couple of years. And all of a sudden, the door opened up and a woman came out crying, screaming. And this fellow ran over it. You couldn't imagine what was wrong. And it was his wife. And finally, we walked over and he says, "Can we help her?" And everything. He said, "No." He said, "My wife just went through a terrible experience." She was up in the balcony and listening there. And she started visualizing, you know, what happened. You know, they killed a lot of the people there. As a matter of fact, it's a tremendous synagogue, and there were very few people. They never come back. But the Ashkenazi synagogue that night was crowded. And this place had maybe 200 people, could hold maybe 3,000, you know. And she was upstairs, and she got so emotional, she didn't want to scream inside of the building. So she ran outside to scream. I mean, some people get carried away like that, you know.
Going back to Pacific Street, is there anything that happened to you in your early life, either on Pacific Street or in Stanford, that you think played a major role in developing your life the way it did? Do you have any very strong memories about influences in early Stanford?
I don't know whether it was so much Stanford. I think my influences were probably been the same no matter where we were. My father was a very bright man, and his father was a rabbi who was too weak to have a congregation, but my father's uncle, was one of the great rabbis of the country. And my father went to yeshiva, and he was very bright. But when he came home and he saw how poor the family was, he quit. But my father always wanted education, you know, and he wanted his children, you know, he used to pound us, you know. And I really preferred to play football, because when I played second string quarterback to Eddie Hunt, and Eddie Hunt was a great, you know. Paul Kutzer was third string quarterback. And you didn't, in those days I was much heavier. I mean, I weighed probably 150 pounds, 160 pounds. And, but my father wanted me to go to college, and he wanted me to be educated, you know. So I went through the, you know, I really didn't care that much, but when I finally went to college, I tried to do well because I wanted my father, you know, I wanted to please my father. But after I got interested in it, then I figured, look, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I want to know my craft. So there's no sense of just cramming for exams like you do in high school. I really tried to learn. And I think that's probably influential. I don't think that the community as such had anything for that to do with it.
Butch, do you have any fond memories of Stamford back in your early days?
Well, I remember everything. I don't know if I was very happy, I'm sure.
Yeah, oh, it was a great
Everybody,
time.
we had nice friends. And,
Life was certainly simpler then than it is
yes,
now.
of course.
Yeah, we used to swim, that shady side I was talking about.
Yeah.
We used to go down there and dive off the paddle wheel.
Yeah,
Oh,
well, we'll get up
my
on the
folks
top of the boat,
My
dive
folks
off.
ever saw me do that, they, you know. But we'd go down to Halloween Park, there was a golf course. And I learned to play golf in Halloween Park.
Mhm.
They had a little
It's now
9-hole
Cummings
course.
Park.
Yes.
When I was
right.
maybe 10, 12 years old. I don't think I ever got any better.
Most golfers don't. They stay the way they are. Any other memories you'd like to share with us of your early days in Stamford?
Well, one of the things that I think did have a big influence on me was, remember the name of Morris Perlman, whom you might have known.
Oh, yes. Yeah, jewelry store.
He had a jewelry store, and when I got out of college, I used to speak Yiddish fluently. I still speak it fairly well, you know. I might forget words, but I understand it perfectly. But I used to work at a camp during the summer. Mike Lofsey and I worked at a camp up in New Fairfield called Camp Arden. And during the summer, winter I was in college, and summers we worked at the camp, and we never spoke Yiddish. So I forgot words, you know, I would forget what to say. And I went to the old Hebrew Institute, the Walensky family were having a wedding. Sarah Walensky was getting married. My dad and I parked the car, and my father and my sister and brother went in. My mother, sister and brother went in, and Pop and I went in, and somebody stopped me, and old lady Walensky was standing at the door, and when I walked up to her, I shook her hand, and I forgot what to say. So I said, Good Yontif. And she said, Mircha Shimbadir, that means it should happen to you, you know? And my father stood there and he laughed. Well, in those days, there were a lot of people who wanted to draw wills, and they didn't speak the language, you know? There weren't too many lawyers then, in 1928. But at any rate, I started to practice. And I got friendly with Morris Perlman, who was an ardent Zionist, and I became an ardent Zionist. And he used to take me to lectures, and we imported, when we got the new center, we imported people like Chaim Greenberg and some very outstanding Jewish speakers. And to hear them speak, I finally became so fluent that I spoke what they call a literarisch Yiddish, a literary. In other words, you know, Jewish is a jargon, you know, it's partly Russian, it's partly everything.
Yiddish, yeah.
And what they would do, what the literary people did was
It was
a
more
word
pure.
a word like philosophical. They would say philosophisch, you know, they add a suffix or a prefix, a concrete example. They made, you know, concrete. They said concretisch, you know.
They coined their own words.
They coined their words. And for a while, you know, not everybody in Stanford were Zionists. As a matter of fact, there were very few of us. And I joined the Farband, that was the labor, I wasn't a laborer, but I joined the Labor Zionist Organization.
Right. That was a very strong movement in Stanford.
Well, it was a very strong movement. It were mostly the people who were really ardent Zionists whose work, they're still in existence, I believe. I don't think I'm a member anymore because I don't pay any dues. And most of them I don't remember. I think they're gone already.
I think it's disbanded.
But they were the ones that really were the ardent Zionists. Morris Perlman would borrow money to give to Zionist causes.
Talking about borrowing money, do you remember when you were younger that when families first moved to Stamford, that people would join to help them and to help them get settled and help them with housing or food. Is that a memory that you have?
It was, yes, my father was the president of the Stamford Hebrew Free Loan Association for many, many years. I have watches that were given to him, I don't know how many years. But my father was the backbone of that institution. He was the president, and the Wattenbergs, you know, Mr. Wattenberg was the treasurer. Now, they loaned money. My father was a firm believer, and I think most of the Jewish people then felt that a Gemilas Chesed, that's what they call it, the Gemilas Chesed, a loan is the thing. A gift is nothing. If you never pay it back, it's too bad. You know, you just didn't pay it back, but it wasn't given to you. And they would loan money. The maximum was $400. And little merchants you could come and borrow $400. You had to have an endorsement, but they never sued anybody for it.
There was no interest on that?
No, they used to borrow money. During the Depression, they borrowed money at 6%. But of course, a lot of people belonged to it who didn't borrow. See, you paid. I think the dues was $5 or $10 a year. But my father would go around to some of the wealthier people and get $100, which was a lot of money.
And then they were able to lend that money to people who needed it.
Well, yes, that's right. And I well remember I was on a committee when they were building Fairfield Home for the Elderly. We had a dinner honoring Goldstein, Dave Goldstein, who was a lawyer, a prominent lawyer in Bridgeport. And they were announcing pledges. And Dan Rosenblum, who I think became president, got up and announced they gave $10,000. I think it was $10,000.
Danny gave that?
No, the Hebrew Free Loan.
Oh.
You know, in my father's honor. You know, and I said to my wife, you know, my father's turning over in his grave. And, you know, money, you give it money for a thing like this, it's for poor people. You know, but I was too much involved, frankly, myself, with other things. You know. And I always felt a little bit guilty that if I didn't do it myself, that I should have seen that somebody else did it. Because at that time, and from my early youth until the Great Depression, there was never a Jew on relief. Never. Now we had...
The Jews are very proud people.
Yes. Then afterwards there was plenty of them. Once you start, you know, that first taking is the difficult. But we also had another group called the Achmas Sorchim. In other words, we had itinerant rabbi. I don't know whether we never knew whether they were rabbis or what, but they would come to services. And they had no place to stay, so they would find a kosher home for them and then give them the money, give them $2 or $3 to go to the next town. Achmas Sorchim, they call that. But as I say, I remember my father saying, and everybody, no Jew goes on relief in Stamford, never. Until the Great Depression, then it was just impossible to hold it.
Sure. Well, gentlemen, we thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Well, I didn't know what we were going to say, and I didn't stop talking.
There's always something that comes back.
You talked so much, I couldn't get a word in.
I'm sorry, Butch.
Is there anything you want to add before we...
I gave it credit for being a Shylock.
Shylock.
Renting your bicycle for... You wouldn't let a kid ride.
I like that story. I like that.
You don't even... Do you remember that?
What?
If you tried a penny
Sure.
to ride your bicycle?
I was the only one that had a bicycle.
He still has the first penny he ever earned.
Yeah.
You know, but that story about we stand behind every bed we sell. But they had that right in the window.
Sure.
And I
bet you got into a lot of trouble that
As a
night.
kid, I walked by there and I used to wonder, why do they do that? Who can sleep with them standing behind the bed?
Yeah, but they turned the lights on.
And